Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about serverless. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how do you see serverless computing impacting web development today? Well, if we're talking present time, I would say that serverless is, based on most of the applications that I've built, used for one of two things. Either it is used in order to run some type of batch job, like a cron job type of thing, or it's used for some very minimal persistence or something similar to, storing an event on a queue or acting as a very simple API or something like that. It's very rare, or rather, I only have one coworker that I know that worked on a production system that was all based on serverless. And I've said before that the serverless movement, like what that represents, is what I argue is like, that is the, I'm not saying the future, because it's going to be hard to say that that is going to be the case, because there's more to it than that, but it is the ideal setup for people, I argue, because the serverless movement, or like sort of the thing that that represents, is to remove more and more of the stack from the development process, which is a very good thing if you know what to remove. And I've said that before as well, guys. Abstractions are good just as long as you don't need something that they are taking away from you, because the more abstractions you have, the less you have to deal with, like the encapsulation thing, right? That's the whole deal with it. But if you lose something in the abstraction that you really need, that's not good. And in serverless, I think that that is a pretty good area of where, like, that's the sweet spot for a lot of organizations. And I truly believe that the ideal setup for a serverless system or something like that, well, it would be to have basically just SDK types of like libraries and things like that. There are a few things that might be tricky here, which is like if you have like in-memory singletons or something like that. But like the basic idea of having a serverless function or a group of them behind some API is no different from having controllers and all of that good stuff that you have these days, which is the common way that you're doing development, at least in the web these days. But the thing that I argue for is that all those instantiated classes, or like if you're using functional or whatever you're doing, right? Like all that business logic, there's not really a strict need for that business logic to be something that is just tied into that given server, that you like have to do all the other configurations around it and so forth. You can slice that away and just put the whole scaling and the load balancing and all that good stuff onto the provider, or like a cloud provider, and then using serverless, because it's still like the way we do it now is the same deal. It's literally like, that's the way at least I think about it. The standard web application or REST API, whatever, so forth and so forth, it's just a URL that maps to a function. That is at the end of the day what it is. And I don't see any reason why you have to spin up like a whole web server and do all that good stuff on top of it. I mean, I've been doing it for years, and every single time I do it, like, I mean, I know it by heart more or less now, so for me it's quicker. And with AI it's even quicker than it used to be for me. But serverless basically removes the whole need for me to do even that. And for me that may not make much of a difference, but it makes a massive difference when you're trying to scale an application. And that is the thing that I believe is underrepresented within the serverless community, or the people who are buying into it. And that is the power of simplification, so that you can reduce cost. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm glad you asked. My argument is that the thing that serverless represents is the thing that I try to achieve in my role at my job, because I'm not just doing development these days. I work as a principal engineer. And the goal for me is, I think it says on my job application, my job description, provide technical leadership, something, right? And like mentorship and stuff like that. And I know that the best thing that I can do for the company that I work for is to make sure that code is shipped as quickly as possible with the lowest amount of delays and high quality and all that good stuff, right? Now, but I also know that I'm going to have to deal with hundreds of people, which I do. I have hundreds of developers who work like based on my recommendations and the stuff that we do together and so forth and so forth. And I know that I can't just say to everybody, read these books and like do all this extra work and be extra talented and be extra good at everything and so forth. Like there's a range of people. And so for me, from a business point of view, the best thing I can do is to set up the work environment in such a way that all the work that is necessary to be done that cannot be automated or simplified in any way, like the actual like getting requirements from stakeholders, putting that into code and then shipping that, the thing that everybody's afraid that AI is going to take over, right? That part, that's what I need the person for, like the developer needs to be able to do that part. But the remainder, like all the boilerplate and all the stuff that is not necessary or the stuff that we want to standardize on and so forth, the best thing I can do is to make a really strong, simple to use implementation of that and provide that as a solution. Such as my favorite example is the cloud providers SDKs. I mean, all the major like labels around the world when it comes to IT, they have like REST APIs that you can connect it to, or like they have SDKs of various languages and stuff and so forth. And I argue that that combined with a serverless setup is the best from a business perspective thing that you can do, assuming now of course that you don't have any limitations that might be with like integrations or file systems or data formats and stuff like that. You can do whatever you want. That would be the best setup, because that basically means that you have simplified the delivery of value, because setting up the servers and like scaling them and figuring out how many boxes you should have, like all that stuff, that's not value building. The thing that builds value for the customer is that the business logic is working and that there is a network call that can be made and actually, serve up some data or whatever, right? That's the valuable part, right? However, as I said, we're still very much in the standard setup where you have like a web server. So like serverless has not gotten to the point where I would say that it's worth you like committing to it or anything like that, because standard web development that's been done for at the very least the last 10 years, as far as I've been involved at the very least. I'm not sure when you're watching this, but it's at least 10 years now that it's still the same game, still exactly the same in many. I mean, there are of course things that have changed and so forth, but like the way we do development is still pretty much the same. I'm not sure that if that's ever going to go away. It might be that now, due to AI and becoming more accessible and so forth, we take like a whole different direction. So we just keep on doing the thing we're doing right now, but now we have AI to produce the boilerplate, and so we don't see a reason to go over to serverless. So what I want you to take away from this is that I would say that serverless has very minor impact on the average project today. Most of the use cases I see for it is like event-based stuff, which is one of the things that it flags itself a little bit for, where you have like timer triggers of very simple APIs, and you have something happening in the ecosystem, such as like an alert or whatever, to like just respond to some event. Now, I personally believe that using some type of gateway system and having serverless instead of using like standard setups and stuff like that could, in theory, if you know what you're doing. That's the tricky part, right? It's not that many companies who have invested in understanding why it is that, for example, AWS and GCP and Azure and so forth, like why do all the major labels have SDKs for their platforms? Well, because the people who have built these platforms, they are providing them to us as customers, of course, but also to their own teams. And that's the thing that I don't see a lot of like regular IT company do. Regular IT companies, they don't do that at all. Like they don't have like this platform mindset around the way that they build systems. And I mean, I've lost count now, or rather, no, I will say, if you go check my CV, every single company there, all of them I've ever been to, every single one of them has had an attempt at creating a standard UI library. And I think everyone except maybe one has failed to do so, which is sort of the thing I'm talking about. Like if you don't know, if you're aiming to standardize and like simplify things so that you can not, for example, have to hire super senior software developers with many years of experience to do basic shit that a junior could do, well, then you have to, I argue, the right way of doing that is to have the best of the best that you have, figure out, okay, so how do we simplify the work process so that the ecosystem we find ourselves in is simple enough that a junior software developer can do that. And if you have really good developers who know how to build SDKs or standard UI libraries and stuff like that, and then you pair that with a serverless or something similar, like there are other services of course, but if you put those things together, you do get as simple a workflow as you basically can. Like you get the sweet spot. If you go even simpler than that, then you're in the low code areas and no code solutions and stuff like that. But for the average company, for the average system that I've seen at the very least, this is the sweet spot, because now you have full freedom to do business logic however you want, yet you've also simplified and removed all the stuff that is necessary that might be complicated for someone who's a junior. And if you have a team of junior software developers overseen by maybe one developer who has some experience with that, that is probably at least financially, the best thing you can do. And that's the thing I see too little of, that I would argue that more people should look into, instead of just having serverless as this thing that you use in order to respond to a queue message, or you run something every Sunday on weekdays or something like that. Have a great day.